Simmons to bring this program to you. And we are elated to be at the fifth series. And I think that we've saved the best for last. But I want to introduce my colleague, Denise Simmons, to come in, and then we'll move forward with introducing our speakers.
Thanks, Manikka, and welcome to everyone. Good afternoon, good hot afternoon to everyone. To our speakers, it is great to see you. And as my co-moderator says, it is just an exciting opportunity. As she mentioned, it's the fifth of a 5-part series that looks like it's going to last a little while longer. And it's because each conversation we've had has gotten better and richer and sort of begged the question, why stop now? Because there's so much more to say and so much more to do. And when we think about how much more there is to do, I would be remiss if I did not mention the unfortunate passing of Congressman John Lewis. You know, we stand on his shoulders in so many ways. Here's a man that dedicated his entire life to the betterment of man, but the Black man in particular. But by doing so, he did it for the entire country. Mm-hmm. Civil rights activists. I mean, when I see the number of times that John Lewis was beaten and he just got up and kept going at it. The work that he did around voting rights, civil rights, more recently, gun control, the 50-year anniversary of the march over the Pettus Bridge, all these things that he has done, some that he got to see come into view and be exercised by his Black brothers and sisters, but also to watch and know how much more that needs to be done. So we do this, Manikka and I, in his name. So if I could do one thing special, I just want to dedicate this particular program to Congressman John Lewis. And so I welcome all of you that each in your own way are marching in the vanguard with him around these important issues. So thank you so much for doing it. To Congressman Lewis and his memory, let's all thank him for what he has done. And I look forward to this conversation.
Yes, indeed. We have big shoes to fill when it comes to Congressman John Lewis, and I am ready to roll up my sleeves and try to put those shoes on so we can continue the fight for justice and equality, not just for Black people, but for all people that suffer. So today's program, we're gonna focus in on resources, community and economic resources in the context of COVID-19. And I am really excited to introduce our guests. We have KATHLEEN PORCENA. She is Vice President of Relationship Management, for Berkshire Bank. We have Marie Frances Rivera, who is President of Mass Budget. We have BRANVILLE Bard, who is our Police Commissioner for the City of Cambridge. And we have April English, which this is a long title, so let me get this all in for you, girlfriend. She is the Chief of Organizational Development and Diversity for the Office of Massachusetts Attorney General Maureen Healey. All right, I got it all in. So let us set the stage for this conversation around COVID-19 in the context of resources for the community as well as economic resources. So just some context of where we are today. When Councilor Simmons and I started this program, never would have imagined that, a couple of months later, across the country, cases for COVID would be surging. Right now, across the country, there are 3.7 million cases of COVID-19 and 132,000 deaths. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have 113 confirmed cases and 8,400 deaths. In the city of Cambridge, we have confirmed cases 1,133 and confirmed deaths at 98. And what's interesting for the city of Cambridge with those confirmed passings are a lot of those were concentrated in senior facilities. When it comes to COVID-19 on our economy, the National Bureau of Economic Research has officially declared a recession. We have an official COVID recession, and it was declared on June 8th. And in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have an unemployment rate right at about 17.4% based on information that was released yesterday. With all of that information, you know, our community, particularly the Black community, but the community, broader community in Cambridge as a whole, we find ourselves in some very stressful and trying times as a community, as a holistic body, but also individually, your household and your finances, as well as businesses, wondering whether or not you're going to survive. And even at a municipal level, we're really fortunate here in Cambridge, where we have an abundance of resources. Our city budget is at 715 million, and our school budget particularly is at 213 million. And those were increases over 5% for the city of a whole, as well as our school department. We're really fortunate here. However, we have to start grappling with this reality that because of the way that COVID has been managed at the national level, that we may start feeling some devastating impacts as it relates to our municipal budget. And there are already people in our communities feeling the economic impact at a business level, as well as at an individual level. So I want to start with Marie Francis. You know, you are the president of Mass Budget. Can you just set the picture for us around what are municipal budgets looking like, and what is your organization thinking about in the context of COVID-19?
Sure. So thank you all for having us. And and thank you also, Denise, for bringing in Congressman John Lewis's legacy. And I just want to echo what you were saying. You know, I feel like you all as elected officials and all of us are really, you know, charged with continuing his legacy and doing the good work on behalf of communities. So thank you all for convening all of these conversations and for bringing me a Mass Budget in. So just so everybody knows, my name is Marie Francis Rivera. I'm the president of the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center. We're a think tank that's focused on advancing equitable policy solutions here in the Commonwealth. We do have a special focus on the state budget, and we also look toward the federal government and municipal governments, as it's all kind of interlinked. So yeah, I just want to agree with what Manikka said. I mean, if we're looking at Cambridge in particular, Cambridge is in a very fortunate position of, you know, being a resource-rich city. Unfortunately, other cities around the Commonwealth aren't quite in the same position, but still, you know, we all need to be working together to uplift Black communities and all communities. But what we're seeing on the state level and across a lot of other municipalities is really in terms of looking at the public good, all the things that we do collectively together, like schools and public health, other functions, we're seeing that we don't have much money for this because of, you know, the economic recession that COVID-19 has really launched us into. So, you know, on the state level, we're seeing potential budget holes of up to $7 billion. And that's of a state budget that's about $50 billion. So it's a relatively large hole. To this point, we've gotten some money from the federal government through the CARES Act, and some of that money went to the state and municipalities. Other money went directly to individuals to support individuals that are unemployed. Others went to businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program that I know KATHLEEN and Berkshire Bank has been instrumental in really supporting small and medium-sized businesses through. But still, even with the money in the CARES Act, we still see that we're going to need more support. And the thing is, there's so much uncertainty around when this crisis is going to end. We just have no clue. So we really need to figure out, you know, how are we going to get more support from the federal government? Congress is going back from their recess on Monday. So hopefully we'll see that they, you know, are able to negotiate something that can, you know, help our communities, as we're seeing, you know, big looming budget holes and people continue to be unemployed, as Manikka mentioned.
KATHLEEN, I'm really curious. I would love to have you jump in here. How is COVID-19 impacting how Berkshire is thinking about banking, particularly in the context of minority communities?
Sure. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I hope everyone is doing well and staying cool. I know it's extremely hot today. But I feel very fortunate to be a part of this conversation because I do think that Berkshire has taken some incredible strides in order to support small businesses and residents, particularly in underserved communities. So my role as a relationship manager is really to provide concierge services to all customers, despite what their income looks like. And historically, we've seen this type of level of services really be designated for, a small minority group of folks, and not people that look like, the panelists that are here. When I think about what Berkshire has really tried to do during COVID, I want to just focus in a little bit on the PPP program, because I think that the way that we were able to try and manage it was unique. So the federal government passed a Paycheck Protection Program, which had $349 billion, with a B, billion dollars, specifically to be funneled through the Small Business Administration. And I want to just point out that, this is not a resource issue, it's a deployment issue, because the resources are there. What the government lacked to do was really figure out a strategy to truly engage those communities that are underserved. The PPP program, there were actually nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and sole proprietors that are eligible that had no clue. They had no understanding of how to access the funds. The application process was extremely confusing. I mean, myself had to go through it tons of times to really understand it, and then to be able to translate it for our clients. But to just figure out how can we actually be at the forefront and be responsive to this resource and make sure that it gets to the people that truly need it the most. So some of the things that we did were we partnered with local organizations and people that were on the ground that made sure that they had the right connections to the folks that needed the programs. We had webinars exclusively for nonprofit and faith-based institutions. We also had webinars for sole proprietors. I know I personally held a ton of kind of office hour sessions through Zoom. And our hope was essentially to just answer people's questions. I mean, I had tons of businesses literally in tears saying, I haven't heard from my bank. No one's answering the phone. No one's responding to my emails. I don't know what to do. So our response was, okay, how do we reach out to these folks, despite them being a customer of the bank or not, and really get them the services that they need? Through that program, we were able to bring on tons of businesses that were not even Berkshire Bank clients. And that's something that I'm really proud of that we were able to do.
Yeah, and can I just jump in there, because on our last program, we had some small business owners say something very similar. And so I really want to, congratulate you on that. And just, if you can just, speak to, some of those barriers and how, what can people listening to do reach out to Berkshire in order for them to start building those relationships, even though they're not banked with you?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And I think, to be honest, I didn't realize the value of having a relationship with your bank until COVID. I mean, it's something that is really, we don't think about it. We really think about relationships in the health sense. You want to have a relationship with your healthcare provider. You want to make sure that they know what your issues are, but we don't think about it, especially the Black community, with having a relationship with banks. So when I say businesses could actually pick up the phone and call someone, that in and of itself is incredibly unique, which is crazy if you think about the money that we have. It's our money, right? Banks should be responsive to the individuals. And when you have programs like PPP that have hundreds of, every week there's a new legislation that comes out, there's a new requirement, you got to go through the paperwork, and it was just really confusing. Even now, we just found out that they've extended the deadline past June 30th. So if there are listeners out there, small businesses, churches, nonprofits who haven't applied, there is still time. There's funding that's still available. Please reach out to us. Any of the My Bankers are able to actually still take applications and support you through that process. It's not an easy process, but it's definitely one that we're willing to kind of walk you through.
No, thank you for that information. Commissioner Bard, let's get to you, because I think that during the pandemic, I think it's fair to say that you've kind of had a tough one because you've had to manage your department and be a leader in the city of Cambridge, and then these issues that have always been a part of our community around racial justice hit hard, and it really hit our community in a unique way. But I think it's important to have your voice here because, you know, the police department serves multiple roles. And can you just speak about how did you reorganize or reimagine your department in the context of COVID so you could be a community resource? Oh, you're on mute, you're on mute.
Thanks for having me here, and thanks for that question. So you got to look at it in this context. So during normal times, the police are government's most visible representative. So during a crisis, particularly one that's going to require most of the city workforce to stay at home, that characteristic is magnified. So while all of the emergency and public safety apparatus of the city were available through this entire time during COVID, the relative mobility of the police department made it us that were the likely agency to carry out a variety of tasks and to help the city and the community continue during this pandemic. So we engaged in a long list of actions that were taken to keep our members safe, and then to keep the community safe, and and sometimes I would say in cases just fill voids that allowed the city to continue to help protect vulnerable populations. So internally, we immediately took steps to protect our members, with the underlying thought process being, you can't help the community if you yourselves are not healthy. So we added additional personal protective equipment to all of our vehicles. We published a general order entitled Emergency Procedures during a worldwide pandemic response. So it created a detailed plan for policing during a pandemic, including court rulings and police powers in conjunction with public health official orders. So we altered our response to medical calls. We no longer responded to calls that weren't life-threatening. We allowed just pro ambulance to go on and do that. And we changed the procedures requiring officers to don PPE in more situations. We implemented more telephone reporting, meaning teleserve, so we answered more calls without actually responding. Obviously, we continue to respond to calls for crimes in progress and anything where life was threatening. But that bicycle that was stolen a week ago that you just now discovered, we just took that report over the phone instead. We eliminated 2 officer vehicles and, you know, aimed at minimizing our contact and in-person roll calls and things like that. And we began cleaning our vehicles during every shift. Some things we did externally to ensure that the department really to help with the continuity of operations for the city, meaning that to help the city perform its necessary functions, we stood up an emergency operations center. What an emergency operations center is really the brain center during an emergency or catastrophe, including a pandemic. So all communications flow through there and all decisions are coordinated through there. So every day, twice a day, officials from public health, all of the area hospitals, all major city departments communicated with each other. And it allowed the city manager and the decision-making apparatus to have the available information readily available to make appropriate decisions. We helped the city manager's office coordinate with external regional assets. We even helped Public Works with signage and park closures and disseminating supplies, working with inspectional services to handle social distance complaints. We helped Human Services run the free meal distribution sites. We were the agency responsible for all mass distribution PPE acquisition for the entire city. We did that in conjunction with the fire department. And we coordinated the deep cleaning and sanitizing of all facilities where there was an exposure event using specialized companies. We also assisted with the end-to-end planning, support, and security of the temporary emergency shelter located at the War Memorial. We were responsible for, I think I might have mentioned that already, the logistics and mass distribution for the Cambridge Housing Authority to all of the senior buildings, for all of the food distribution sites, and for every city employee. We also individually delivered masks to seniors throughout the cities and those individuals with disabilities. We made up more than half of the team who made calls to, I think more than 7,000 calls to our seniors throughout the city, making sure that they had the basic needs that, that they would need during normal times, but particularly during this COVID emergency. Through our clinical support unit, we followed up on every site call, which you can imagine during a crisis like this were heightened, and for every overdose call to make sure that those individuals were connected with the tele resources that they needed. We continued to do our weekly multidisciplinary homeless outreach, and the meetings were virtual, but we still had to go out and meet the vulnerable where they were out in the community, and for those who weren't in contact with services at one of our shelters. We did some other events like a virtual science festival and published extended domestic violence resources. Even as late as this weekend, I think, you opened the show with this hot Sunday. So even as late as this weekend, all of our MARC units are equipped with coolers with cold water so that we can help members of the homeless community, and any member of the community for that matter, but stay hydrated during these times. So we'll continue to do the work even in these difficult times.
Yeah, I think that
if I might just jump in just for a moment, something that Carleen, PORCENA said about deployment issue. First of all, you seem to have it really well covered, Commissioner Barr. But one thing that just came to mind was, are you seeing an increase in crimes? And it kind of dovetails with some work that April English does, particularly toward the senior community. When we talk about deployment and resources, is the Black community in particular getting the message in terms of what resources there are? Are you seeing an uptick of services toward the community? You're doing such a great job of getting the message out. So where is that all placing you right now? And the last thing I do have to say by way of question or maybe statement is one of the things that really comes clear through what you just said is how much of what the police department now, the public safety department does is so much public service. So I wanted to speak a little bit about that.
So, okay, let me just keep track of your questions. So yeah, there were some things we anticipated and some things we didn't. We know that times like these are an abuser's dream. Like you get folks in situations where they're literally captive with their abusers. And so we expected to see domestic violence calls rise. We didn't see that initially. We didn't see that for a while, but what we noticed through our domestic violence specialists and the outreach team, that the calls that we did see were more serious, though, meaning that the nature of the threats and physical abuse was heightened, more serious crimes, serious bodily injuries were threatened or actually happened. So we anticipated that. So we were working with area service providers, primarily the transition house, to ensure that we had heightened resources available for individuals. Certain things that it took time to catch up to. So like, crooks are innovative. So it took them a while to catch up and to build schemes that worked pandemic related. So the biggest thing we've seen is identity fraud through unemployment insurance. So we've seen those skyrocket where, somebody will claim for the unemployment benefits for BRANVILLE Bard, but not actually be me. And so we've seen those other schemes that we've seen have been reimagined, with the senior population. And, we've had folks take an old scheme where they say that grandma and grandpa, it's me, Joey, I've been arrested, I need bail money, and just put a COVID related, spin on it and get the individual to send money to somewhere or to buy a gift card. So we've been ready for certain things, and we've other things we traditionally see in our environment. Like we've seen an uptick in bicycle thefts, but that's not unusual for Cambridge. Everybody commutes on on bicycles. So we've seen an uptick in those type of things. But as it pertains directly to COVID, domestic violence, and then the identity theft and the other fraud schemes.
I think this is a perfect time to bring in April, who is out of the AG's office. And, you know, if you can just give us insights on, you know, what are some of the resources that you have available through the Attorney General's office, and how should people be thinking about COVID-19 in the context of the work that you do?
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is April English. I'm an Assistant Attorney General at the Office of Attorney General Maura Healey, and I serve as Chief of Organization Development and Diversity. And you're absolutely right, Manikka. I have the longest title in the office, but I'm happy to be here. So the Attorney General is the Chief Lawyer and Law Enforcement Officer of the Commonwealth. And with that duty, she is an advocate for the people. And so we all know that COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted our Black and Brown communities, our Asian and immigrant communities, as well as our low-income communities. And so it's disheartening to hear that all of us have seen the same issues, but it's comforting to know that all of us who are here today are working on those issues and have the resources and the assistance that folks need. And so because these communities are in such dire need of help, we continue to work on getting resources to hotspot communities like Chelsea, Brockton, Everett, Lawrence, Lynn, Randolph, Revere, New Bedford, Boston, and Worcester. And we've actually distributed tens of thousands of flyers in multiple languages: Spanish, Portuguese, Cape Verdean Creole, Haitian Creole, Chinese, Vietnamese, Russian, French, and Arabic, because we want everyone to be informed. And we've handed out and distributed these flyers, as well as sent them around electronically. And we're talking about places such as food pantries, churches and mosques, neighborhood associations, hospitals and community health centers, government officials and municipalities, so they can get them out to their people as well. Nonprofit partners such as the Chelsea Collaborative. And these flyers are also, I want everyone to know that these flyers are also available still on our website. And our community engagement division is willing to do webinars in any of these spaces in terms of resources. So the community engagement is willing to do a webinar at your community organization, associations, civic organization, churches, mosques, and temple. Again, if you look on our website, you can click on community engagement and you can sign up to have one of these webinars presented to your community. So there are a number of things we want people to know during this crisis. We don't want people to be afraid to go to the doctor. That was one of the main things when when COVID-19 first occurred. We started hearing from people who were missing their routine care appointments. They were missing their chemotherapy for fear of going to the doctor and walking into hospitals. And so we encourage people that if you are sick, injured, or need routine care, to call your doctor. Also, call your doctor even regardless of your immigration status. We want people to know that they are protected, and we want people to know that you have rights. In Massachusetts, you are protected from evictions and foreclosures, certain debt collection practices, utility shutoffs, price gouging, and discrimination. As the People's Law Firm, we want you to know that our office is here to help, and you should contact us. All of our contact information is on the website, and I believe all this will be shared after this anyhow. But additionally, the COVID-19 pandemic, as the commissioner stated, has had a disparate impact on survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. People may be confined to their homes with their abuser under increased stress and pressure and isolated from their usual support systems. So our office launched an information campaign to highlight resources and created, again, a multilingual resource flyer that provides the Safe Link hotline and information about protective orders, as well as free resources from MOVA. And other COVID resources that are also available on our website. Carlene spoke about the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. We provided guidance to small businesses about applying for loans and called for more equitable distribution because we know that minority-owned businesses in particular have been left behind. And so our office has joined a COVID relief coalition to provide pro bono legal assistance to vulnerable small businesses, which again is also on our website and includes an intake form for small businesses to receive free legal services. In terms of workplace safety, as the commissioner spoke about as well, we increased our resources so people can easily report workplace safety concerns to our office. So as we, go through this reopening process, as that continues, clearly the health of our work is critical right now. My son works at a Target and he is an essential worker, and I have to jump off this call at 2 o'clock to drive my essential worker to work. So we continue to work with local boards of health and state agencies and to follow up with businesses to make sure they are following safety protocols. And then something I'm not sure is on the forefront of people's minds is environmental justice, right? First off, we know that there has been a public health crisis in communities of color for decades. What's different is that COVID-19, this pandemic, is making it much worse for communities that are breathing the most polluted air, right? In the communities who, health-wise, more vulnerable and susceptible to even getting COVID. So we put out a brief, an environmental justice brief that spells out what needs to happen. And what needs to happen is we need to invest in clean energy jobs. My attorney general, as you know, continues to sue the Trump administration on the numerous rollbacks, and we will continue to do so. And we appreciate all your support in us doing so. We need to strengthen protections in the environmental justice communities. And we are making sure that the voices and experiences of communities of color play a central role. And so that is something that needs to be in the forefront of people's minds. Additionally, we created frontlinema.org, which is a website that gives healthcare workers and first responders access to all the resources available in one place. All the resources such as PPE, testing, childcare, meals, self-care guidance, and housing. In terms of consumer issues, we are helping people with canceled events or trips. We've made price gouging of essential goods illegal with emergency regulations. And we continue to educate people about scams. We actually have a flyer on our website of the scams that are occurring. And the commissioner is absolutely right. Identity fraud is number one, right? And the commissioner is absolutely right. The second one is to our vulnerable population, the elderly, grandparents. Something is wrong with your loved one. It has to do with COVID, exactly what he said. And so those are scams that we're seeing. And so we have a flyer on our website that speaks to those scams and gives you numbers to call in case you receive one of these robocalls that deals with this. Because there are a lot of people who are honestly just looking to exploit this crisis, which is really sad. Mm-hmm. We also donated hundreds of tablets to nursing homes, which were greatly affected by COVID-19. And this was an opportunity to keep the residents in touch with family and friends. And we continue to work hard in helping those facing eviction and foreclosure. It is a real thing. Yeah, it is a hard thing.
I want to jump in there, April, because first I want to thank you and the Attorney General. Keep the lawsuits coming when it comes to the Trump administration. So you keep pressing. But I just want to build off of something that you said as it relates to, it kind of goes back to this resource question. And I want to take us to this big picture conversation, because all of our resources, are under some type of constraint. And the more in which COVID is not under control in our country, unfortunately, because of 45, even in the city of Cambridge, which is resource rich, those resources are gonna at some point become finite if we don't get this thing under control. And so I'm just kind of curious, from your professional vantage points, how should we be thinking, particularly in the Black community, around our resources, whether that's economic resources or our community resources? So Carlene, let's start with you. How should we be thinking about our financial and banking resources individually and as a community?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think about as far as resource deployment, especially as it pertains to Black businesses, is limiting the barriers that have been created historically for businesses to not get access to those resources. And I think it's like sometimes you think about small businesses, there's how do we support the existing businesses, but how do we also support that growing sector of small businesses, especially in Cambridge? I mean, Cambridge and Greater Boston area is the number 1 or 2 spot for startups in the entire country. And when you look at which segment is actually growing the fastest, it's Black women. Black women are the highest segment in entrepreneurship in the country. How are we supporting that? Cambridge has an incredibly kind of developed participatory budget process. Are we thinking of that same type of process as we are supporting small businesses? One of the things that we did at Berkshire was develop 2 products that I wanted to share quickly. The first one is the Future Funds program that was developed with the support of BECMA, which is the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, along with Amplify Latinx and the LGBTQ community. But that was essentially a fund that looked at a line of credit because people kept on saying, well, we really don't know what we're going to need to buy. They don't know. So the PPP program, as good as it was, is very restrictive as far as what was eligible to be forgiven. And the Future Funds program has a lot more flexibility and gives people that leniency to use the funds, especially Black and Brown businesses, as needed. And then the second thing I wanted to talk about is in order to start a business and in order to grow your business, most businesses use friends and family funding. That's how you see a lot of businesses get off the ground. We know in our community, those friends and family, we all have a lot of friends and family, but the amount of friends and family that we have where we're allowed to, pull from pockets, it's limited. So thinking about how Cambridge can really think about filling in that friends and family gap is crucial at this time. One organization that we've partnered with is called the Runway Project. They're out in Oakland, California. They recently launched here in the Greater Boston area. And that's exactly what they do. They have a friends and family fund that they kind of align with small business support. And that's a wealth building strategy. Our role in that is to think about how do we as a bank underwrite Black and Brown businesses differently. We can't use those same standards. That's credit. What do your assets look like? What does your past history look like? If we're going to think about really equity within lending. So for the Friends and Family Fund, we actually have a community credit committee that looks at kind of social underwriting. What has a person been doing in the community this far? We're not looking at kind of those historic systemic barriers that have really kept Black businesses out of being able to really grow and expand their businesses, because we know that banks have held back our communities for so long. So we want to think about that differently. I think that, Manikka, what you said, think about it as a big picture. It's really about creating the most seamless way for people, individuals, to get access to those resources. April talks about the pro bono services, just filling in an intake form. That's the kind of strategy that we need. We don't need a 20-page application. We need simple processes to get funding to the people that need it the most.
Now, I appreciate that. And we're going to go to Marie Francis. And then after that, I know that we have a couple of questions coming in. So I want Councilor Simmons to be able to ask that to the group before April has to leave us. So Marie Francis, can you just give us your insight, like that big picture perspective around how we should be thinking about resources from the state, federal, and even at the municipal level?
Mm-hmm. Yes, this has been such an interesting conversation. I want to say just thank you to April as well and the AG's office for just really creating transparency and resources and processes that are really confusing sometimes. So just really appreciate all the great, fantastic work that you've all been doing. Yeah, so one thing that I'll say is that the federal government is just really, really important, crucial at this time. be supporting all of us. And one reason is that the federal government can deficit spend. So really at a time where we're seeing just an economic halt all across our economy, the federal government really has that power to deficit spend to really get us through these tough times, which the state doesn't have. And in Cambridge, proposing a balanced budget, we're not gonna, on the state level, the city level, borrow our way out of this situation that we're seeing ourselves in. So that's why it's just critically important, and we're fortunate that our congressional delegation here in Massachusetts is strong and progressive and really fighting for us. But we really need to continue to really push for the things that we want and need here on the state level. So I would just say, one thing that we need to continue doing is just like pressing the federal government for more state and municipal flexible aid to do all of the things that, the AG is doing, to continue fueling the Paycheck Protection Program. All these things are, funded through the federal government and through a lot of these like economic stimulus bills. And then here on the state level as well, even though these federal supports have been great and we need more, there are people that have been left out. So we mentioned sort of like the problems with the PPP program, but even with unemployment benefits, folks who aren't documented, and even those direct checks that we all got, the $600, the $1,200 checks, there are certain folks that actually weren't able to access those because of their documentation status. So there are things that we can do here on the state level. There are current bills up in the State House for folks who file with an ITIN, meaning that they pay taxes, but they weren't able to access some of those funds, that they could get those funds here on the state level. So there are lots of things that we can continue doing here on the state level to support folks that have been left out.
Thank you. Ms. Porcena, a quick question for you came out of, you had mentioned very quickly two things. One, that there was still money available, and so people need to hear that number again. You also talked about relationship building, if you have a relationship with the bank. So this particular question speaks to, I went to my bank where I bank all the time, got nowhere. Can I still access the resources from your bank? So basically applied with the bank because I don't know, maybe it was close by. They're just not getting the response that they need. Can they now come to Berkshire? What can they do to get more information? And and if you can repeat that number and the date, the extension date.
Sure. And this is unfortunately what I've been hearing for the past couple of months. No one's answering my phone calls. No one's responding to my emails. And this is a bank that I've banked with for years. So I would say the entire pot of PPP funding was $349 billion. That pot hasn't been fully deployed yet, so there still are funds available. I would suggest, one, I know that the CCTV is going to be putting our contact information on their website, so please check that out. Mm-hmm. My email address will be there, so you can email me directly and I'll be able to kind of walk you through that process. We are taking non-customers, specifically those small businesses who have been affected by COVID, which is, essentially everyone. But the My Bankers on the REVEX team are definitely able to help you out.
Great, thank you so much. The next one is for Commissioner Bard, and I'm going to try to read it verbatim. Although less serious than other crimes, can you say anything about any action taken around the relentless setting off of fireworks? This is not my question. It all seems to affect all neighborhoods, but it does pose a danger in the more densely populated sections. And then the next question, and it says, there seems to be an abundance of information available. I think this is to everybody, but do we know if elders and members of low income and immigrant communities have the technology to access online resources? What can be done to improve access to that critical information? So I think that one is for anyone. Why don't we lead off with you, Commissioner Bard, and then anybody wants to weigh in on that second question about access. The information is out there, but you have the technology to get to it. Commissioner Bard?
Okay, so fireworks, yes. It's not just a Cambridge phenomenon. It's not just a regional phenomenon. It infected the entire New England and Northeast region. So when you look at it, at one point up until the holiday, Boston was up more than 3,000% in fireworks complaints. We were approaching that level of increased calls for fireworks complaints. I think some folks are lack understanding as to our enforcement capabilities. Fireworks are illegal, but we are only empowered to issue a $100 fine. So we understand that, you know, while we keep getting those calls, we understand that fine, that $100 fine in itself can be regressive, meaning that when you go into a marginalized community and issue a $100 fine, in some cases that might as well be a $5,000 fine because that individual can't pay the $100 fine, and therefore you in turn criminalize them because now they're you know, they have outstanding warrants for not, you know, for failure to pay that fine and so forth and so on. So it was my thought and my position to go at the supplier level rather than the individual level, understanding that it was an enormous nuisance and continued to be. And although calls have begun to wane, there's still some use of fireworks persists, but understanding that it's a, you know, a delicate balancing act, and, you know, in many ways a catch-22 when you enforce, use your enforcement power in a marginalized community. That $100 fine, it might sound small to some, but it's a heavy burden for many of the folks in our community. So.
And thank you for making that definition, because, you know, as we all know, and Manikka can attest to this, but there's been so much discussion about defund the police and we take back some of the duties or roles of police. And so you're sort of in the catch-22. People saying, oh, can't you do anything about the noise? But just what you said, I think it illustrated very well is, but if I do something about that noise, I set up another problem. And
I have some folks being very intentional about not calling us for the fireworks because they understand that, and some folks losing that picture and, you know, saying one thing about defund and decriminalize and but then every chance they get saying go get those folks for the fireworks. Yeah.
And I do appreciate, and I didn't think about this, and shame on me, maybe not going so much at the perpetrator, but going at the supplier. Maybe if we make it more difficult for them to provide him, it'll have less of an impact on our neighborhoods. So thank you, Commissioner. I want to just go, do you need me to read that last question about access to elders, folks, or do you have it? I can read it again, whatever.
Well, you know, I would love for April to jump in on this, because when I think about that supplier issue, my brain goes to the Attorney General's office. And so I'm just kind of curious, have they even weighed in on some of these issues around the firework piece?
That's a great point, Manikka. April?
I honestly can't speak to that. My criminal bureau could speak to that, but from what I hear is in agreement with the commissioner, it is a hot topic. And when you're talking about going for the supplier is typically not in Massachusetts, which makes it a little bit more difficult. And I'm not sure necessarily worth the resources.
I see.
And so I am 1000% with everyone who is tired of these fireworks, 100%. But I think the commissioner hit it on the head that a fine, and I don't even know that the fine, is the fine $100, Commissioner?
It is.
I feel like, okay. So that is a lot. And some of these individuals are grown folk and some of these individuals are not. And so that makes it more difficult also in terms of our resources, because then what that can turn into, and I'm sure this is what the commissioner has thought about as well, is then it can turn into a racial justice issue.
Right.
And so we, in this time, and as we lift up Congressman Lewis, we're not trying to go there.
And I'm in full agreement with Ms. English, although I stopped short of bringing up the worth the resource issue. I'm in full agreement with
you know, I think it's interesting, and I think it's why, at least for myself and, you know, for Councilor Simmons, why I think this show is really important, because being a person of color and particularly from an Afro background, African American or a diaspora background, we bring a lens to our professional environments. And a lot of times in the conversations that we're having right now as it relates to racial justice and Black Lives Matter, sometimes there's conflict around, you know, those professions, and sometimes there's alignment. And so I just want to thank everybody on the call right now, because what this is showing is that we're willing to be inside of systems in a way that will elevate the voice of social justice and voices that are mostly marginalized. Right. But because of your work, you know, those voices are at the table. So I just want to thank everybody for that.
Thank you.
That's
a whole nother series, by the way.
Yes, it is.
That's why we can't stop doing the program. Very quickly, Commissioner, the questioner wants to thank you for your clear response and says they deliberately do not call the police department, and glad that you're looking at, so where's the supply? So I think it's good to hear someone says thank you for your answer and your approach. Let's go back, because I know we're coming up on 2 and April has to leave, but this access question, I think if we could maybe get people to weigh in on it, it'd be wonderful. And it says, again, there's abundance of information, but do we know of elders and members of the low income and immigrant technology resources, and what can be done on that? You know, Marie.
I want to chime in. I want to chime in before I leave.
Please.
So for everyone on here, we have an elder hotline. It is 1-888-AG-ELDER, which is 1-888-243-5337. A couple of things. Number one, if you are in community with elderly people who are living alone, who do not have access to the internet, or if you are in community with low-income individuals who do not have that access, or if you are in community with immigrants who need this information translated into their language, right? And they do not have access to the internet, please call our office, because we have the resources to come to the community. That is one of the main things about our office, is we are community-based and community-led. We have the Racial Justice and Equity Council, where we use that community in order to get the word out. We have a New Americans Council, where we use that council to get the word out. We have a disability rights group, where we use that community to get the word out. And so word of mouth is helpful. Also, letting us know where you need these resources to be is helpful. Contact us, let us know. The Attorney General literally stood outside in Chelsea on a sidewalk and handed out information and flyers in Spanish, in Portuguese, what have you. We have the ability to do that. We have the ability to send stacks of flyers to a church, to a community organization, for people to pick up and hand out to individuals. So we're willing to do the work. We're willing to put in the time and the effort to keep people informed and safe.
Thank you, April, for that. And I know that we're coming on the hour and we're going to be closing out the program. So I just want last thoughts, 1 minute each, so we can close out and so April can bring her essential worker to work. So Marie Francis, let's start with you. 1 minute, last thoughts.
Sure, I'll just say one quick thing. In addition to all the great work that April was mentioning, and I think you might have mentioned this, I mean, there are so many community organizations that have been doing this work of community building for so long, and really now are, you know, Chelsea Collaborative, for instance, in Chelsea. I know, you know, Gladys Vega has been doing that work for a long time. So there are like rich community organizations that are doing a lot of that outreach, in addition to what the AG's office is doing and others. But yeah, I guess I'll leave with a few points. I mean, let's continue to like push the federal government to get more resources. We just need that. And then whatever holes we have left here on the state level, we really have to advocate. Like if we need more revenue for schools, public health, et cetera, we need to figure that out here on the state level to really support our municipalities, because, you know, some aren't as fortunate as Cambridge with, you know, being able to hire 25 new employees still in this, you know, time period in Cambridge. some are laying off hundreds of educators. So really, we're still in crisis mode, and we really need our federal government and our state government to step up and step in.
Thank you. And I think that myself, as well as Councilor Simmons, we're willing to be in solidarity with other communities across the state because that's needed. Carleen, what do you have for me? 1 minute.
Hey, 1 minute. I would say that, you know, Black communities have been inherently communities about people, right? Our lifeline has literally been community. But I think what's really important when we think about building and maintaining that wealth is also talking about how do we protect our assets and how do we protect what we have, especially in times like this. So I know when we were talking earlier, we had mentioned, you know, people need to think about wills and building trust within their families, ensuring that all the work that we've done so far, all the work that these leaders that we have mentioned before, you know, that the next generation isn't starting from scratch. We have built so much, but if they're not protected, then, you know, we're really not we're gonna keep on this cycle of building. So I think it's really important to think about how you can intersect with departments at our bank, like our wealth management team. I mean, they're doing free assessments and financial planning for people with as low as $100,000 in assets. That's very different from what you see other banks doing as well. So thinking again about ways to protect what you have in order to build it for the legacy of our community.
And that too is another show that we can do.
Another show. Call me back, call me back.
Yes, I will call you back. Commissioner, give it to me, 1 minute.
So it's great that we're having this talk about the economic impact of COVID, particularly on, you know, communities of color and the Black community. I think that, you know, I challenge everybody to think of public safety in terms of a valuable public good and understand that there's economic value associated with the delivery of that good. And that as a community, you got to demand, and as a practitioner, I got to make sure that it looks the same, regardless of your zip code. So, you know, that means that it values civil liberties and that it always protective of individual rights. So I think that's 60 seconds or less.
And thank you. And thank you for your work and your service. April, what do you have for us?
Some words: community, educational information, resources, access, and accountability. Now more than ever is most important for us to build and be a community and be cohesive as one, and to be sharing information that's necessary for people to access resources. And you should wholeheartedly right now be holding your government and elected officials accountable.
Wow.
Well, I will expect some phone calls after that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I just want to thank everyone for agreeing to be a part of this conversation. I always feel energized after myself and Councilor Simmons, we put these on. And as she stated earlier, you know, this was supposed to be a 5-part series, but we have already been informed, not even asked, informed by CCTV that we need to keep this going. And so I'm really excited about that and the possibilities of the conversations that we're going to have that will always take into account Black voices. And we know the experiences that we have, they're unique into ourselves, but they're also shared experiences too. And so I think that this is going to be a really great opportunity moving forward. And Councilor Simmons, your thoughts as we close out this part of our 5-part series, but also start thinking ahead about the conversations we want to have with the citizens of Cambridge and beyond.
Well, first of all, I had to start by just thanking my co-moderator. You know, let's talk about toiling in the field of justice against injustice. So thank you for that. She often keeps me going. So thank you so much. Just to use the words of Congressman Lewis, I want to thank all of you for helping us be in the part of good trouble. You talked about good trouble. And so this is good trouble. The work that you've done, you know, we talk about the generational and legacy wealth and are pushing and supporting our federal representatives or public safety. And I like this, Commissioner, a valuable public good, which people just don't really think about. You know, I often say when times are hard, you're not going to call Ghostbuster. So it's those important things to remember. And then, and April, you you know, that was a wonderful last word, talking about community, education, resource access, and accountability. That's all good trouble. And we all have to be a part of it. So I cannot thank each of you enough. I cannot thank CCTV and Sean Eiffel and Maritza Grooms and Susan Fleischman for their support, and Neil Alpert for their continued support of our program. And as Manikka says, I guess we're going to do part 2. This is part 1 of a 5-part series. And so part 2, we are looking at doing August 2nd at 1 o'clock. And we'll be talking about COVID and the Black community in terms of, Clyde Jacob, when I talked to him the other night, said, you know, Denise, the storm is not over. And we're entitling that. The storm is not over. Because although our numbers are low, because other cities and states across the country are, I can't even give a name to it, are handling this in a way that is just outrageous. It's going to have an impact on us. And what can we do to continue to keep our community safe? So I hope that you will join us, listen in when we have that conversation. We'll also be doing something around the observance of women's suffrage, because you know, they talk about, we're going to celebrate women's suffrage. And the question we have to ask is, women's suffrage for who? Because the way we're looking at it is 100 years and still waiting. Where and how Black women were left out of that for so many years. And I'm excited about doing that. So again, thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for helping us make good trouble.
Thanks
Yes,
to our
indeed.
hosts for recognizing the need for this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
This is great.
So to be continued. And we hope that you all come back and be a part of our Black Cambridge series at some point. Thanks so much. And everyone, have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Stay cool.